Escaping the Fold by Vincent Merkel. Flight. I did not know that the circumstances that surrounded me would keep me on Thylacine for 5 long months before I could begin to put my plans for escape into motion. It would be a lonely time waiting to see the woman who had taken my heart with her to the faraway island on the other side of Linnea's watery domain. It was a dangerous period that offered little in the way of hope, as Christos and the Malaks searched the northern ridges for the Thylacine Queen and her coveted shield. Linnea had told Christos about my intrusion on his beach. Christos knew that I had been there, but suspected I had died somewhere in the cliffs below the northern ridge, as he and his search parties could find no spore of my existence. My mind goes back to the day that Alexandra flew her solo mission to Deuteronomy. I relegated myself to using only the Oculus entrance to the Underdome. The antechamber entrance was well hidden, but as it was on ground level, it was more likely to be breached by the Malaks should they have found it. The only way to get to the massive stone slab door on the northwestern side of the island was from a path that led from the cliffs at a western pass. The day that Alexandra took to the skies, I had spent the better part of 2 hours driving timbers with a sledgehammer, trying to loosen the rocks and debris from a cracked cliff above the western pass. Mickey, Zeus, and Odysseus kept guard of the lower terraces. It was a project I had undertaken weeks before I had finished building Alexandra's flying machine. I read the fissures in the cliff carefully, and just before I was about to give up on my back-breaking and ambitious project, 15 tons of dirt, stone, gravel, and dust slipped down the steep bank. A monumental boulder fell almost squarely on the path below and was hidden by the following rubble and debris. My back and shoulders ached. I had shut off the only way to the lower hidden entrance of my haven. I thought about Alexandra as I worked on creating the small and effective avalanche. I thought she would be arriving in Deuteronomy soon, if she had not already landed. I had fully gained Alexandra's trust. She was clueless to my intent on the day that I had cut the cord that kept her glider tethered to the ridge. As soon as she felt the jerk of the rope that attached to the stabilizing bar of the craft, she looked under her arm and listened to me. She saw me wave my machete, and she knew that she would then have to make the journey on those light and magical wings. She hated that she was forced into it, and felt a great deal of animus towards me for not giving her another option, but she well knew that there was no better day to fly. Alexandra had been listening to my instructions. She knew the storm patterns from watching the ridges and clouds for 12 years, and the observant girl understood that her chance for escape was better at that moment than any other. I swung my machete, and 100 feet above me, her body jerked with force in her harness. She laughed as the sail caught the convective shear of wind from the cliff and pushed her upward at an alarming rate, and she cursed down at me in her own childish way. As the sleek, aerodynamic frame climbed up to touch the soft edges of a wispy cloud, the exhilarated girl shifted her weight forward and leaned her downwind wing into the wind. Her craft had a good forward momentum as the winds blew across her face and her eardrums popped. She was deafened, yet had never felt so free. It was at that moment that she yelled out from the depth of her abdomen and forced her breath to ride the wind to my ears.
I love you, Thomas.
For the first time in 12 years, Alexandra could raise her voice without fear of betraying her location to the crafty and cunning Malaks. While Alexandra was hanging in the air, she took note of every rock and wake that she perceived on the surface of the water far below. She felt as if time had slowed down because everything below her was so small, and the crests on the ocean's shimmering surface had appeared to stop moving. As she tells it, she hung in the air for 10 hours, but the official record shows that it was 2 hours and 27 minutes from the time I had signaled the Kalans to the time she was spotted from a brass telescope mounted at the City of Lights Observatory on Deuteronomy. The jungle undergrowth at the base of the granite tower entrance to my domed walls was full of budding flowers and the thorns that protected them. The many traps that Alexandra had set over the years around the base of the chimney were well hidden and undisturbed. My sight scoured the forest for any sign of Malaks. I mimicked the chirp of one of the smaller creatures of the trees. Mickey answered me. His musical notes came from the uncertain woodland and assured me of my safety. I lowered myself back down into the cavernous tomb. The rope was attached to a counterweight that made traversing the 75 feet to and from the oculus an easy task. I pulled the lever on one of the red-painted Minoan columns and closed the oculus door, and then fired the oven and drew a bath in the pool at the end of the columns. I suspected that I had a fair amount of time to make my preparations as I thought about the information Alexandra had relayed to me over the month before her flight. Christos was living in a large wooden structure that was elevated on pylons. He walked on a wooden deck under a tall thatched roof. It could never have been built if it were not for his presence there in the Malak village. Christos had surmised that the tribe of people that made up his army and navy were indeed imbeciles. The new emperor's advance up the vast mountainside would be delayed as he felt compelled by the stupidity of his underlings to micromanage every aspect of every vessel and hut that was built under his reign. Alexandra's observations took on a comical quality as she laughed and told me about the things she had witnessed from her secret perch in the tree above the Malak village. She had relayed stories of the advancement of the Malaks, and it appeared that even though the Theodoro had been found, the reports of their findings, due to the limitations of the simple Malak language, left Christos unaware of the precious wrecked hull. He had begun to map the island with a small party, but it was a time-consuming and annoying chore for the captain, as he was the only one from his entire entourage that understood mathematical concepts. Aside from some crude symbols painted on the warriors' faces and bodies, none had ever written a letter or understood the properties of a character. The last that Alexandra had noted was that Christos liked the comfort of his longhouse and all of its furnishings. It was a convenient place for the savage tribes of the fold to meet their new ruler. The hot water of the bath soothed my aching and sore muscles. I looked up at a ray of light that broke through a split in the oculus door panel. It was about midday, and Alexandra would be nearing her final approach to her new world far from me. The light shone on a section of the mosaic floor at the center of the chamber. In the medley of seemingly random scattered colors and tiles, a line emerged that pointed to an inscription on one of the carved limestone coffers near the back wall of the basin of the pool. In conjunction with my prior knowledge of the hieroglyphs, it was easy to determine that the previously unnoticed inscription revealed the location of a lever that actuated a wall in the pool that I sat in. I reached my arm to the edge of the basin, grabbed my neglected bottle of whiskey, and took a swig. I would have one swallow and save the rest to share with the parents of the wild and beautiful girl that had saved my life. I was contemplating pulling on the new lever I had found. Alexandra had never told me about the hidden stone actuator, and I assumed that she did not know that it existed. She had warned me, on my first visit to the underground sanctuary, to never pull any levers because she thought I wasn't smart enough to keep myself out of traps. The documents show that Alexandra had been flying for 2 hours when I pulled the lever. The wind had swept her upward, and she fought to keep the kite going toward the island where her parents were. Once she gained control of the glider, she kept the nose pointed down and to the west of her target. The forceful gale at her current altitude constantly threatened to blow her too far to the east. She decided to fly straight into the wind until such a point that she could turn her aircraft, and the crosswinds would carry her to the northern shores of her destination. For those 2 hours, Alexandra had not only fought the winds to keep moving forward, she also fought her mind. Paranoia set in as every creaking noise that the structure made led her to believe that the aircraft was going to break apart and she would fall from the sky. At one point, Alexandra flew under a bank of cumulus clouds, and the frigid air nearly froze her. Her hands and face became numb from the chill as she flew under the white tufts of cotton, while the turbulent winds violently battered her wings up and down. She held on tightly to the control bar of her flying apparatus. The winds blew her high into the cloud bank, and for 15 minutes she was lost there and unable to see anything, until she managed to descend 300 feet, and once again she saw the faraway crests of the water below her. She marveled at how deep and still the ocean appeared to be. She could see the signs of civilization on Deuteronomy. Domes from the tops of buildings in the City of Lights sparkled like golden flecks that dotted the uppermost levels of the grand society she would soon be visiting. Alexandra still flew at an altitude twice the height of the island and did not have the experience with flight to realize that she would soon overshoot a landing on the northernmost beaches if she did not start a descent. John and Antigone stood with King James. The Princess Anasta and my friends and former crew members stood close to the king and his royal guard. They watched the skies and held their breath at every speck of dust that floated in front of them. King James spoke. "I see every trick of the atmosphere, and our heartfelt desire to see your daughter arrive from the clouds has driven us to focus on every shadow that drifts across our lenses." James paused. "That the wind could carry her above the clouds seems very magical and improbable." George answered the king. "But, James, king, I have seen Thomas build. From what John says, the materials and tools needed to build the type of aircraft we told you about were available to him. He is good." The navigator of the Tilly informed the king further. "It has been done before. It is not magic, it is engineering. The winds are perfect for a trip from the south today." Antigone interjected.
I know, George. You are our compatriot from our native land, and you have shared your credentials with us. You know your shipmate's ability to build a glider, but we don't know Alexia's ability to fly one. My worst fear is that
She hesitated.
I cannot bear to think it.
Antigone was then interrupted by an excited voice. "I have got news from the observatory for the king and his guests." The panting messenger straightened his body. James commanded, "Waste no time." The leather-clad messenger read his report. "A woman is being carried by a bird at the following coordinates." The man held out a piece of paper with something scribbled on it. "She comes from just under the first cloud on the horizon sighted 15 minutes ago." James questioned the man. 15 minutes ago? "Yes, right about there." The thin scientist from the observatory brought out a bronze telescope from antiquity and handed it to the king. James searched with the old but well-guarded monocular. He set it on a tripod and pointed the scope according to the scribbled coordinates on the crumpled note. His fingers turned the fine focus adjustment, and at the point where angels sit on clouds, the Theodoro's sail came into view, and just under it the figure of a woman. James looked through the eyepiece of the telescope and said, "John, Antigone, come, look. Tell me if the beauty that hovers in the sky is your daughter." John situated himself in front of the scope and looked with amazement. He cried to his wife, "Antigone, it is Alexandra. She is flying a glider. It is her." Antigone pushed John out of the way and put her eye to the ocular and began crying for the joy she felt at seeing her darling girl.
How long until she gets here? Will she make it? She is so far away.
Vangelis interrupted her. "Antigone, let George look. He can tell you a lot from the construction of the glider in the lens of the telescope." King James asked, "George, is it true? Can you use your skills to forecast the time and placement of Alexandra's arrival?" George casually looked into the eyepiece and wrote some notes in a book he had with him. George had become the king's most trusted engineer due to endorsements from John and Antigone. The navigator's skills with math had proven him to be a very valuable asset to the Kalan society, as did Vangelis' skills as a chemist. George looked at the side of the scope and its tripod and wrote down the measurements indicated on the transit controls and lens adjustments. Through the round field that he beheld the flying girl, George read the hatch marks in the crosshairs and called out measurements to the scientist that had brought the news of the now identified flying object. "Princess Anasta," George called to the king's daughter, "we have to get a message to Alexandra. Can your god Druag send a signal to the coordinates I have written here?"
Druag,
the princess commanded.
set the shield to these coordinates and get ready to send a message.
Druag set the shield as instructed. George spoke quickly. "She is too high. If she does not start her descent now, she will completely fly over the island. We must send her a signal to follow, but first we have to get her to confirm that she sees the light." The official Kalan papers show that about the time that Alexandra had been spotted from the Kalan king's telescope, I had pulled the hidden lever at the back wall of the bath in the Underdome on Teleonisi. A ratcheting sound from behind the back wall of the pool was accompanied by the upward moment of a submerged stone slab. The water level in the bath stayed the same, and the retracted stone partition gave way to a large opening under the warm water. The memory of Alexandra's warning kept me from ducking under it to explore what was hidden on the other side. I stood adjacent to the opening. Still wet from my interrupted bath, I extended the point of my spear under the header that hid the slab wall. I found a triggering mechanism with the cutting edge of the javelin, and with a splash and a flash of silvery steel, a blade the length of the opening slashed forward into the pool and severed my teak spear. The reflection of a soft and golden glow in the water bespoke of lighting from within the tunnel under the warm bath. The trap would have easily left an intruder to the dimly lit tunnel on the other side with half a head, if any. I carefully rolled under the blade while holding my breath. Through the crystalline water, I saw no more indications of traps and emerged from the previously unknown half of the bath basin. The natural gas light fixtures that lined the walls of my ancient sanctuary also adorned the walls of a long and narrow descending cave. After a few moments of searching, I located a trigger that would reset the razor trap and close the trick wall, leaving me confined in the descending tunnel. Before actuating the reset levers, I made a small pack of supplies in a semi-watertight bag and armed myself with a hefty spear from Alexandra's armory. I brought my bow and started down the descending underground trail, feeling secure that no person could follow me or access the Underdome while I explored the new path. While I was walking down into the depths of the long and weakly lit corridor, Alexandra's glider was being pushed towards Deuteronomy by the northwestern storm. The airborne woman was suspended in a wooden and cloth harness under a grand airfoil 3,000 feet above the sea. A flash of light from a faraway ridge on Deuteronomy caught her attention. It lit up a few more times. She looked to the flashes of light and recognized the sequence as a request. The pulsing light repeated, "Wave your arm." It flashed again, "Wave your arm." Alexandra knew that the communication device was a precise tool and that the signal was intended for her. She knew that for anyone to get a message from one of the legendary shields, the sender would have to be in a direct line of sight to the receiver. The message repeated, "Wave your arm." Alexandra laughed as the wind swept her up and out of view of the flashing light. She knew that the Kalans had telescopes and correctly deduced that they were watching her. George dominated the telescope and tracked Alexandra's timing and movement, all the while barking out her coordinate changes to the watchman who controlled the messaging system. "She is waving! We have contact!" George exclaimed. King James, Princess Anasta, and their guests gave a collective sigh of relief and chattered about the good fortune brought by George's expertise. George snapped at the group. "Be quiet! Druag, send this signal. To reach the beach, you must follow the light. To follow the light, you must descend. Wave your arm if you understand." George watched through the eyepiece and held his breath. Alexandra waved. George ordered Druag, "Send a new message. Keep the light at your eye level. If you fail to see the flash, drop your nose until you see it. Wave your arm 2 times if you understand." 2 dark shadows swam under the water's surface, 3,000 feet below Alexandra as she read the messages with ease. She struggled to hold the kite steady as she waved her arm 2 times. George announced to the group, She will be on the northern beach in 20 minutes. I will guide her there." King James smiled proudly and commanded his guard detail, "Prepare an escort to the beach for the Princess Anasta and the Sirtakis family. Tonight there will be a celebration. I go to the citadel to prepare a feast." He took Vangelis. "You come with me, and though we will prepare a banquet, do not sing. We need no angels falling from the heavens today." As Alexandra was flying to Deuteronomy, back on Thylacine, I carefully walked down the corridor under the ancient domed tomb. It was easy to understand that the freshwater spring that fed Alexandra's sanctuary had also carved out the cavern and the tunnel that I followed. The sides of the cave walls were irregular, and the downward leading steps were comprised of jagged edges and rocky layers. The glowing gas lights that spotted the walls became further and fewer between than before. At frequent intervals, I noticed other veins of smaller tunnels branching out from the main corridor. They were too small and dark to explore, although I thought I had seen a glint in one of the side tunnels that I took to be eyes, but I assumed that it was just a trick of light on the interior wall. I moved cautiously for about 30 minutes. The path became darker as I went, until I found myself shuffling along a worn shelf, my hands against the cave wall in absolute darkness. As I moved further into the abyss, I began to hear faint echoes. I saw a scant light on an opposing wall at a dogleg in the trail. As I slowly approached, the glow in the cave intensified with the echoes. I drew an arrow from my quiver and armed my bow. I turned the corner, and the bright light momentarily washed the details from my sight, but it was clearly daylight. The long tunnel ended abruptly and opened into a large cave. The opening of the cave was brilliantly verdant. Every hue and intensity of green was present in the canopy of Thylacini's north side jungle, framed by the gray and black cave opening far above the jungle floor. I was startled by a ferocious shriek and realized that I stood 20 feet away from a slumbering monkey tribe that lazed on the floor of the cavern. A large red monkey stood and thumped his chest. As the loud clapping sound filled my ears, another shriek came from the center of the awakened tribe. The big monkey forgot his challenge to me and turned to face a grand and muscular creature that spoke to him in the language of the lesser apes. The gold and yellow striped beast sat rigidly on his haunches. Alexandra's Thylacine, Odysseus, turned his voice to me with the hoot of an owl. From behind me, the sound of 2 tree frogs assured me of Zeus and Mickey's presence. It was about that time that Alexandra was on her final approach to Deuteronomy. As the wind blew the glider with force, the 2 strange shadows steadily swam below and far behind Alexandra. Her muscles were strained from holding a steady descent to the beach of her new homeland. In the distance, she could see a procession of strange horse-like creatures and heavily clad warriors. The girl decided to ignore the signals from the ridge as she understood her forward and downward momentum. She knew where she wanted to land. Alexandra's eyes strained into the distance and saw 2 figures that were being escorted, and in her heart she knew the stance and essence of the people that she loved the most. Her father's hair had grayed significantly over the last 5 years. Her mother was still the most beautiful woman that she had ever seen. Upon seeing her parents, Alexandra forced the nose of her aircraft down and picked up speed. She pulled on the control bar and pointed the kite to the point where sand meets water and dove straight for her mother and father. John and Antigone saw their daughter's flight path and called out to the woman whose wings bore the sail of the Theodoro. Alexandra's craft stalled and fell from the sky 60 yards in front of her anxious parents. The wild warrior woman gleefully laughed as the kite quickly lost altitude. Alexandra pushed her feet forward and pulled back hard on the control bar of the air glider. The air caught the sail and slowed the descent with a jerk on Alexandra's harness. She pulled a belt that held the flying apparatus tied to her body as her feet touched the wet and packed sand in the tide. The kite, still in full sail, trailed off behind her as she ran with the forward momentum of her body. Alexandra cried like a child as she ran to her mother's and father's outstretched arms. This concludes Book 1, Escaping the Fold, The Thylacine Queen. Coming soon, Book 2, The Savage Politic. As you know, I am a very old and tired man, but I am not too tired to continue my story and let you know how things have turned out. Unfortunately, I cannot relay the years of my experience to you in a few short moments, such as we have spent together until now. I must leave for a short time, but when I return, I will continue my tale. After all, it is not fair that I have not disclosed the fate of Christos and Nikos. I could not realistically expect you to rest well, not knowing if the fierce Babula continues to weave his evil spell on those who look into his wicked eyes, or if Vangelis had unlocked the secrets to trapping the beast of the deep. I have yet to share the fate of all of Kalan's citizens and the fold, and how George found a path out of it. There is much more to learn about all of the characters that played a role in what has transpired, but I am tired. I must go to Alexandra now, but I will return very soon, my dear friend, and tell you of the traps she and I have set, and those that we have escaped. When you learn of the friends we have made while fighting the evil things that inhabit and roam the fold, you will feel secure that we are not alone, and we are guided to each other by a loving and merciful force. Until then, peace, courage, and strength.